right, thanks for everybody for tuning in. This episode, we're going to be talking about the 1980 Stanley Kubrick classic, really, I guess, The Shining.
Well, I guess we should start with the fact that Stephen King fucking hates this movie and has been very outspoken about that.
What's interesting about that, which I always assumed that most of his hatred just simply, because that was one of the things that I've always known, like, oh, Stephen King hates this movie. So I never really looked into it, but I've also always known the history of this movie. And I don't think it's any secret at all to anybody that the making of The Shining, working with Stanley Kubrick during this movie, was an absolute hell, especially for Shelley Duvall.
Yeah.
But I always assumed that Stephen King did not like this adaptation or this movie because I always assumed he thought it was a bad adaptation. That was what I always assumed. And so then when I started looking for sound bites, because I was like, when we were doing this episode, I was going to, it'd be kind of cool is if I could find some sound bites where Stephen King talks about where he didn't care for the adaptation and stuff. And then it turns out this whole time I was completely wrong. And he doesn't care for this movie, but it's for the reasons that we all know about, that he did not care for the way that Stanley Kubrick treated Shelley Duvall on the set of the movie and stuff, and that always bugged him and stuff. And I always assumed it was because he felt it wasn't that good of a movie, but I was wrong all these years. Sorry if I stole some of your thunder there.
No, that's okay. I would agree. I do think that with Stephen King and the fact that the way Shelley Duvall was treated in this movie, in the making of this movie, was horrific. But I do have to say, I do like this movie, even if it is not a great adaptation of the book.
And I would agree, too, that I've always enjoyed this version of The Shining. I always thought that this was a good movie. When I was younger, I don't know that if I ever really, when I first saw it and stuff, I don't know if I ever really understood the concept of like a good adaptation or not. But as I got older and stuff, and this was one of the movies that I kind of always not clung to. It's not like a favorite necessarily or anything, but like one time when I was in my 20s, I think I was in my 20s, maybe my 30s, I got to see it one time at a midnight showing, which was pretty cool. And stuff. But yeah, I always knew that Shelley Duvall was treated horribly on it. I don't know if Stanley Kubrick was that way on other movies. I mean, I'm assuming he probably was. When you hear stories about people and stuff, they tend to be true, and it usually isn't a one-off thing, so.
Well, and what else did he direct? Clockwork Orange? Is that a Kubrick film?
Yep.
Yeah. I feel like he's just kind of fucked up.
Strangelove, and yeah, there's a bunch of them, so.
He's just a weird man. He does make a good movie, though. I will give him that.
Yeah, this is one of the cases of where the adaptation part of it maybe is lacking, but it is a good movie. And I mean, overall, if you were just a casual fan of The Shining and you kind of knew what the story of the book was, I could see like a casual fan thinking that it is a good adaptation. And overall, I mean, it kind of does get sort of the general gist of the book across, even though if it misses a lot of the themes of the book, I guess. Because that's where I think it really fails, in my opinion anyway, is the big lack of the father and son between Jack and his dad. Those aren't really mentioned at all in the movie. Really, it's the other thing that's really kind of missing from the movie that I don't know if I've ever really noticed this before, but this time around I really did notice it. When I was reading the book, the most recent time, was in the book, while there are all of the spirits and everything else that is occupying the Overlook Hotel, and those are all trying to lure Danny in and everything. But the entity itself, like, to me, like this most recent time, is almost the Overlook itself, and then when you watch the movie, that's not that's not in the movie at all. Like the
Yeah, and
Overlook's just kind of the background.
I would agree. I feel like one of my notes says the biggest disservice I think this movie does to the book in terms of an adaptation is, it's obviously Jack Torrance is one of the main characters, and the book is kind of about, in my opinion, his descent into alcoholism, and obviously that is influenced by the Overlook. But in the book, it was more so through Danny's lens, and you get this over apparent feeling that yes, the hotel is using Jack, but the hotel's gonna discard Jack at some point. That's not the hotel wants Danny and wants Danny's shining, and I feel like the movie kind of misses that. The movie is very much Jack's story and changes a lot of things in a way that I don't necessarily agree with, and that I don't think were great choices. But yes, I would agree. There are definitely still those spirits in the book, but it's apparent that it's the hotel kind of puppeteering everything.
The other couple of big differences that I noticed this time around too, one is that, and again, we've already talked about Shelley Duvall, but her portrayal of Wendy in the movie she is a lot, like, I don't want to say weaker, but I mean, her character in the movie definitely is like this meek character that's just like, just shrieking and doesn't know what to do. And if it wasn't for Danny, she would have been totally screwed. Whereas in the book, like, Wendy's character is a little bit more stronger, and she's a little more, even though the same stuff happens in the movie for the most part, like, he still ends up in the cooler and stuff, and she did do that in both, but she's just more forceful a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit in the book. And then the other thing that I noticed too this time, it's kind of interesting, but it was just a little thing, and it was Tony. And whereas he's mentioned a lot in the book, but once they get to the Overlook, Tony's not really there at all. Like,
Yeah.
it's just like references to, like, like you had said, like, where Danny's remembering, like, oh yeah, like, Tony used to tell me this, or Tony was telling me this, or him like, hey Tony, are you going to come and help, and stuff. Whereas in the book, or in the movie, I mean, in the movie, Tony's there the whole time, and so that's a little bit different. That, and the other thing with Tony too is, in the book, it's made very obvious in the book that, at least to me anyway, that maybe this was just a fact of after seeing Doctor Sleep, but to me, at the end of the book, it's kind of, Danny kind of realizes that Tony is most likely himself in the future, just giving himself, heads up on all of this stuff. And again, that's not even mentioned at all in the movie. So, but I don't remember if that's addressed in Doctor Sleep. So,
for someone who loves Doctor Sleep so much, I could not tell you on the spot. But it's almost time for my not biannual, my once every 2-year reread of Doctor Sleep. I love Doctor Sleep. That book, I don't know, there's something about it that is like crack. I will pick that up. I will read it in one afternoon, and then I could read it again. I will say that this adaptation of The Shining, I wish I would have been able to see it in the theaters. This is a movie that I feel like was really meant to be seen on a big screen.
Like I said, I got to see it once, and it was one of those things. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. It was a while ago now, but it wasn't like, whenever this came out 50 years ago. But yeah. This is one of the ones I've seen it, because I saw this one on the big screen. I've gotten to see Halloween, the original Halloween. I've seen on the big screen a couple of times. I have seen the original Friday the 13th on the big screen, which is cool. The only one I haven't I haven't seen the original Nightmare on Elm Street on the big screen yet, just because it's when it has been playing in places, I just either have been busy or like, it was recently playing. Like last year, it played one time near us, but
Mm,
I didn't really want to pay like $17 to go, see a movie that I
no.
have on DVD and like stuff. Used to own on VHS and I could watch anytime I want. That's what we used to always say about with John Carpenter on the old Horror Heads podcast when every other year a new version of Halloween would come out. Like it'd be like, oh, like now it's coming out on Blu-ray. Oh, now it's coming out on Steelbox Blu-ray. Now it's coming out on Ultra DVD or whatever and stuff.
Oh, Ultra DVD.
And they would always change like the cover and stuff, and like people would always have, there were certain collectors would always get like every one, like, and a lot of times like you're not even getting anything additional or anything, like
Oh,
sometimes some of those ones where it's like, oh, this is new version of it that has these like 8 hours of never before seen footage and like all these behind the scene interviews and stuff, but a lot of times anymore it just seems like all they're doing is changing the packaging and like $60 please.
I'm going to throw us back to your point that you had made about some of the differences you'd noticed. I think the biggest difference for me is I think Jack Nicholson was the wrong choice to play Jack Torrance. I think he's way too crazy from the beginning. I think the book does a good job of showing that, like, although Jack was not a perfect father and was not a perfect husband, I feel like he was kind of a mirror of Stephen King in the beginning of the book, like, especially when Stephen King first started writing with the alcoholism and, stepping into his writing and worrying about failure and like his own family issues. And I feel like the book has a much better slow descent of madness for Jack versus the movie. Like, you kind of tell from the first time you see him that like there's something wrong with this man. Like, he has a crazy look in his eyes. And I think that takes away some of the horror from the story. I think it's so much scarier to watch someone slowly go crazy and end up, trying to murder their family than have someone who you just know something's not right with him.
I have kind of always felt that way too, that, that character was always just like Jack Nicholson playing Jack Nicholson from start to finish.
Yeah. No, and I do think, as far as the popularity of this movie, I don't know if it would have been as popular or as such a stark pop culture moment if it wouldn't have been for him. Like, "Here's Johnny" was an improvised line by him, which, who do you know that couldn't quote that and pick out where that's from? My husband could probably quote that, and he hates horror movies. But I don't know. I think that was one of the things that I really don't like about this movie, but I think it's one of those things that made this movie the icon that it is.
One of the interesting things that I learned just the other day, not really in prepping for this movie, but related to Stephen King, is so I'm reading. I can't remember. I didn't write the author's name down, so I apologize. But I just finished reading this book called Monsters in the Archives. It basically all it is this author was given access to Stephen King's archives, and she decided to focus on the books that were written in the 70s, not just released in the 70s, but written in the 70s. So she talked about Carrie, Salem's Lot, The Shining, and Needful Things. And Pet Sematary. So which I think I had known this before, but Pet Sematary was completed in the 70s and was one of the ones where he like shelved it because he didn't like the story, and then it got released later. It's kind of like a weird, like when he was trying to get out of one of the book deals or whatever, they were like, "Oh, you owe us a book," and he was like, "Here's this piece of crap," and then it turned out to be Pet Sematary. So, but anyway. So in that book, so she talks about some different things about the different books that were written in the 70s, according to Stephen King's notes in the different drafts of the book. And then she also interviewed him and stuff. And so it's really cool for a Stephen King fan. Like, some of these early books, like you get a kind of like a history of the book. It's really kind of cool. But the one thing that I'd never heard about The Shining before, and maybe this is a thing that is common knowledge to a lot of people, and for some reason I just don't know this, but the idea for this movie or for the book came from one night when they were staying at the Stanley Hotel, the real Stanley Hotel in Colorado, and Stephen King had a nightmare about his oldest son, Joe, getting attacked by one of because I guess the fire hoses out in the hallway or stuff. That's how they look. And he had a nightmare that one of those hoses was attacking Joe and stuff, and then that's how he came up with it. And so I thought it was really interesting that so he actually thought of this in the Stanley Hotel, and then it's based on the Stanley Hotel, and then the movie was filmed in the Stanley Hotel. So, I mean, that's kind of cool. Supposedly, if you go to the Stanley Hotel, they have that room now, it's the Stephen King suite or whatever, the one that he stayed in, supposedly.
We were just in the Stanley Hotel, well, not in the Stanley Hotel, at the Stanley Hotel when we were in Colorado last year. And of course, I took one of my copies of The Shining and had a picture taken. I think I knew that it was based on that hotel, but I didn't realize he had a nightmare about the fire hoses. Which, speaking of the fire hoses, I don't think they were in the movie, were they? I know they're in the mini-series.
Oh, okay. So then maybe I'm just thinking maybe they show them or something. Maybe you get a side shot of them. But if you can't...
Yep.
But they would be the old school fire hoses. If you would think of something almost you'd see in a Looney Tunes cartoon or something, they're not what we're used to now, where they'd be contained in glass or anything. These would just be on a whatever, on a rack, or not a rack, but a hose reel or whatever on hanging on the wall. I just thought it was interesting, that that's kind of cool that you were actually staying at the Stanley Hotel and then that's where you had the nightmare.
We didn't go in because we didn't want to pay the $15. So
that was the same when we got there. But I didn't realize it was you had to pay to just to go there or whatever. And this was 10 or 15 years ago, and so then we were just can we just turn around then? So, but I guess it from what I've heard and stuff, it's still for the most part I think looks pretty much the same and stuff because I would assume being a big tourist attraction and stuff.
Yeah. I do think it's interesting that the outside of the hotel was shot somewhere else because the outside of the actual Stanley Hotel is not what the Overlook looks like. But I do think it's funny because when I was there last year, they did have a mini hedge maze outside, which is not in the book, but is in the movie. Which I think that was another one of the big differences. I feel like when Stanley Kubrick wrote this movie, he flipped through the Shining book and was okay, right, scary hotel, ghosts, alcoholic. I've got it. And that he just went from there.
What's funny is when we were watching this, I watched this movie yesterday. Or last night with your mom, and your mom didn't read the book. And she's read it, but she hasn't read it in years and years. And I honestly don't know if she's ever seen the movie or not, or if she has, it's been a long time. And we got to the end though, and that was what she said too. Was she had mentioned she was so I don't remember there being a maze in the book. She's wasn't there the hedge animals or something that were chasing after them? And I was yeah, they were. I think that would have been scarier too, but at the same time, I always wondered if that was just a more of a creative decision that they made at the time, where they were well, we could put those in there, but it's going to look stupid.
Well, and that's what I think too. I think there's something so much scarier about not knowing if something's moving, not knowing that's so much easier to play off as is the hotel actually messing with him, or is he just losing his mind? Which that's another thing in the book too. Is it all in their heads? Like, is there just a gas leak in the hotel? But I don't know. When you take out the things that make the book fun and you replace it with other things, I just think you start to lose the spirit of the book a little bit.
So let me ask you something. This is another thing that, well, actually, the other big thing that I was going to ask you, because again I don't remember, was so at the end Jack kills Dick Halloran in the movie. In the book, he did not. Um, but do you remember in Doctor Sleep? Did they retcon that?
Yeah, so Dick Halloran in Doctor Sleep, he's not alive in the book, but he had lived, which would make
Okay.
sense after the Shining book because he was still alive
Yeah, because
because
that's why I
he
couldn't
didn't
remember.
die.
I was think I know that I knew that his spirit or whatever was in there because he talks to Danny because he teaches Dan because he's the one who teaches Danny about the if you
The
sorry spoiler
boxes.
alert if you haven't watched but about the boxes and stuff.
Yep.
I couldn't remember at the beginning of the movie and stuff. I mean, in the book, of course, he is still alive because he was alive at the end of this one. But I couldn't remember at the beginning of the movie if they had like kind of retconned it so like they all three made it out. And they kind of showed how that happened. So
I don't
uh,
I don't know if they showed how it happened, but I'm pretty sure they followed the book and
yeah,
he had lived past
showed him like that he was like still around like a year later or something.
yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
Which that never made sense to me when Kubrick had Jack murder Halloran because I don't know. It just seemed a little senseless.
I think it was just a chance to actually get some gore in the movie
Mm,
without having to kill Wendy. You know,
yeah. Well, and I think that's
because
why
you
they
can't kill
changed.
Danny at that point.
That's true.
Little kid.
That's true. Well, not until you get to Doctor Sleep, then they're just killing kids left and right. But I do think that was one of the things also that the movie changed was Jack uses an axe instead of one of the like mallets.
Yep.
And that's another one of those things that I feel like he was just trying to make it like scarier, if you will. I think the mallet is so much scarier. I don't know. I think there's something like an axe is too easy to be used as a murder weapon. You know, that's too easy to take someone's life, but you're going to sit there and beat someone to death with a mallet? That's hardcore.
So the other thing that I wanted to ask you about was when I was reading this again the most recent time, there was a couple of times throughout the book. Again, and I think we referenced it earlier when I was talking about the Overlook Hotel in the book, where I said it was like an entity at the hotel.
Hmm.
And this time, again, reading it, there was a couple of different times where I feel like Stephen King referenced whatever was going on at the Overlook as an entity. And I don't think that he was doing it on purpose, but
Hmm.
in my mind, I kept thinking to myself, like, I don't know why he's in Colorado, but that's Pennywise. Like he's messing with like that's
Mm.
it is in Colorado for some reason. And then so it turns out that I'm not the only one who thinks that there's a lot of people
Okay.
that have this like fan theory that maybe Pennywise is somehow involved in this. Did you ever get that sense at all?
You know, when I reread The Shining recently, I was thinking about that almost in the sense of like, we know Pennywise can shapeshift. And that's, you know, kind of like one of his main things. And especially in the book, how it seems like all of the ghouls or all of the, you know, entities are almost designed after, you know, someone's worst fears. And I could see that. I could definitely see that. I don't know how Stephen King keeps his multiverse like straight in his head, but I could definitely see him like conjuring up this multi-dimensional bad guy and not knowing what he's going to do with it yet, but having him kind of have a hand in the pot everywhere.
I haven't read The Stand in forever. Um,
Mm.
and I don't want to. In it, that one's so big, so like I do want to reread it, but at the same time, I don't want to reread it and then us get to the like where we're going to talk about it like in a year or something, then have to reread it again. But
Oh God.
I am really curious if in that in the stand, because I know Randall Flagg is introduced in the stand, and that's kind of, he kind of goes to become the big bad um, of the Dark Tower series and stuff. But outside of that, I wonder if he had any other like inklings to like anything else in like that one where you could think, oh, okay, I could see where that's Pennywise,
Mm.
because I can see like where you could kind of like if you want to really stretch it and stuff to where you could say like Barlow and Salem's Lot, like maybe that's
Yeah.
Pennywise somehow, if you want to say that that's connected and stuff. But I really think like once you get to The Shining is really where kind of like the Stephen King, like you had said, the multiverse. I think that's where it really starts. Even though, Carrie was in Maine, in a fake town in Maine, and then Salem's Lot is in fake town of Jerusalem's Lot in Maine as well, and both of those towns are basically burnt to the ground. Um, I really feel that, like to me, like it was like this is like the beginnings of like Pennywise and stuff, and so even though this came out in what the book would have came out like in '78, I think, and then it doesn't come out until like '86. So
Mm.
yeah, it's who knows, but how his mind works. But I really think that, like to me, it was like okay, I can kind of see this, and then the on the other side of that, the other real similarity, or not the similarity, well, yeah, the other like real similarity to a lot of the Stephen King stories. Again, even though Carrie's, in her like late teens, I would assume she's probably supposed to be 17, and Carrie, and then you had Mark's character in Salem's Lot, and he's just like
Mm.
what 12 or whatever.
Yeah.
With Danny and his telekinetic, whatever his TK properties, whatever you want to call them. Again, I really think that Stephen King, maybe he wasn't doing it on purpose back then, but like these are similarities throughout all of his stories going, on where you could think, oh yeah, this kid, like, all the way up to like his most recent, like the Institute, whatever that kid's name was in there, I
Mm.
mean, that was basically Danny Torrance just in 2015,
Yeah. I think maybe that is like the more fun way to read Stephen King's books is like, okay, where's Pennywise now? You know? Ooh, is this it? Oh.
Yeah, well, and sometimes like I mean, Stephen King is like a lot of people. I think where where he doesn't necessarily put links to stuff, or he's not necessarily thinking about that way with everything. And then like I think a lot of like this one, like this fan theory one of this being in The Shining, he's probably okay with that, but it might not have been intentional at the same time. To whereas there's a lot of times though where I think he'll put stuff in there, and then you'll hear an interview or something, or he'll be talking about something 15 years later, and he'll make a comment about something, and you'll be like, son of a bitch. Yep, that like it's stuff about like he'll make a comment about something about Cujo, or something about in Pet Cemetery about like Gage, or about about Judd or something, and you just, oh yeah, okay, all right, I can see
I
that.
I almost feel as if, he's written all these amazing, dense, gigantic books, and I don't think a lot of it has left him. I really do think that a lot of his characters and a lot of the places and entities he's created just like live in his brain, because I don't know how else he could keep it all straight and like still pull references and, connect the dots. And I would agree that although I don't know if he has always historically, especially when he first started writing, was like trying to put these pins and put these pieces in place. But I think by now, like a lot of it is intentional, isn't it? And is intentional to the point where like he could confirm that that's something that he's doing. I think that he just thinks it's fun.
With Stephen King, because I know that he's an author, and he, like a lot of authors, I've heard him say this a lot, that if you want to be an author, to be a good writer, you need to read. Like, that's the number one rule. Like, grammar and all that stuff doesn't matter. Like, typing, like all that's like, that's the, like, whatever. You can figure that all out. But like, the biggest thing is like being like a proficient reader.
And he must read a lot because I always see his name on like the front of books. Stephen King says that this is the best horror book of the year. And it says that on like 15 books you'll pick up. Like, how are you reading all of these and writing 900-page books?
Yeah, there's a lot of times where, you're just reading it, and then you're just reading about stuff that you're like, why am I reading about these characters that this doesn't have anything to do with? And then, 2 chapters later, then you're like, oh, okay, now I see why. But that's the kind of the drawback to the giant Stephen King universe, though. A lot of times is half the time you almost need a breakdown video on YouTube just to get back into it. Here's the 80 things about Pennywise to know before you get into this next story.
That's true. I think some of Stephen King's earlier books, they would be better if you read them under the same influence that Stephen King used to write them.
And you could probably attest to this, but the Richard Bachman books are very different than Stephen King books. And if you're ever but they have like the same feel and vibe to them, but they are different. They're at a different pace and stuff, and they're just like quicker. So if you're ever in a situation where you're like, man, I really want to knock out a Stephen King book this weekend, and you don't think you can do it, just go pick up a Richard Bachman book. Probably even the longest one, you could probably easily knock it out in a couple of days.
Yeah, they are. It is a similar tone, but it's definitely a different pace. I would agree with you on that. They have a whole different vibe to them.
I don't know if this is true or not, but I don't think that it was only the Richard Bachman books that were this way, but to me, anytime I read Richard Bachman books, I always feel like it's just like this cocaine fueled thing you're reading, because that's probably how he was. He was probably coked out when he wrote it, I would assume. So
yeah,
I think that's partially due to the fact that he's still telling the same story, but he's not doing all of the character development.
Yep.
So, you're getting the same thing. You're just but instead of it being 900 pages, it's 220 pages.
Yeah, he cuts out a lot from those books.
As far as The Shining goes, though, yeah, I would say that I definitely, as far as movies go, I would say I give it a thumbs up for sure. As far as adaptations go, I wouldn't say it's a great adaptation, but I would say that it's like I said earlier, I still think it's a decent adaptation, and it still gets kind of, somebody could watch the movie The Shining and hold a conversation about the topic of The Shining with somebody who's just read the book and never,
I would agree with that. It captures the essence of the story enough. I do think it's a movie worth watching. I think the cinematography is really gorgeous. I think there's a lot of really visually stunning, unsettling elements to this movie that Kubrick does well, as he normally does. But yeah, I would say not my favorite adaptation, but it is worth the watch.
All right, so be sure to like, share, subscribe, all of that stuff, and we will talk to you guys next month.